So, welcome back to lecture number 12, the very last lecture of this semester. Today, we're going to have a look at some lecture feedback that you provided us, because we would briefly like to discuss that with you. And then we'll do a recap of the lecture content, so essentially a summary, and also a little bit of an outlook, or more like answering the question, what now? So closing the loop to the very beginning, where we outlined what you're supposed to learn in this course, what this course was supposed to provide to you, or what it was supposed to do, and yeah, why are we doing this essentially? So those three parts: feedback, recap, and outlook. So let's first start with the feedback. You might remember the course evaluation from a while ago. We did not manage to integrate it yet, but still did not want to withhold those information from you. This is not supposed to be us patting our shoulders and telling us how great we are, because the lecture evaluation results are actually quite good. As you can see in those slides here, there are like one or two people that are sometimes not as satisfied with some of the aspects as they are supposed to be. We have some of the comments where you could actually write free text that gave us some feedback, what we could improve. We'll also come to those in a second. But if you are among those people who are not that satisfied and you have some feedback that is not listed as a comment, you can also leave this to us later, either in an anonymous way, using anonymous emails, or you can just tell us after the exam if you are scared to do so because you think this might impact your exam results, which is not the case, so that we can improve this course and make it better, because this is still work in progress. This is something like it's not an alpha version anymore, but it's definitely not beyond beta testing. So we appreciate all types of feedback and would really like to know what's not good. And we are very happy that a lot of people like the course. We had 28 people answering the survey, and usually above, or roughly about 90% or 80% or so of you are quite happy with what we did there, so this is really nice. But we also would try to, or like to, make everyone else happy. So next, which elements of the course did you like in particular? There was some feedback about the direct feedback possibilities, and that you could just ask questions right away. There was also someone who said, okay, it's really great that this lecture itself exists at all, and that we also had a nice combination between lecturer, me in front of it here, or Anand giving the LCA lectures, and someone in the background. This is probably a good moment in time to also very much appreciate that Anand and Teresa put so much time and effort into making sure that all of this works, so that I just had to come into this lecture room and suddenly magically everything works, but also preparing and post-processing all the things that we prepared and that we uploaded, because this is definitely not me doing this, like partially, but without the two of them I would be very much screwed. And then there are some more positive feedback on interactivity, questionnaires, and so on and so on. So very happy that you liked those aspects. So we'll also keep them, because that was one of the reasons why we asked for feedback, that we know what's good, so that we keep it and not accidentally change it. Next, which parts of the course did you not like? And there, because I also got a few emails, now we have the problem that we get contradictory feedback, because some of you said they very much liked the MOOC concept, and others said they prefer the live lectures over the MOOC concept. So there we have a goal conflict that we cannot really resolve. We'll just try to do it in such a way that you're both somehow happy and that both groups might survive. So we cannot really tell you right now how we're going to integrate all the feedback next time, but we'll of course try to make this course better given the all amount of feedback that we get. The next bullet point, the very long paragraph, is very helpful for us, because we thought we properly communicated this ahead of time. It says that essentially the audience, the target audience is not quite clear. So we thought we communicated that ahead of time, that this is really like a foundation course to teach everyone the foundations on sustainability, and this is definitely not an advanced course. But maybe we didn't do that properly. Maybe there was some way to misunderstand this, or this message did not like get to everyone. So we'll try to do that. What was the last point? Yeah, so there's like, since it's a, there are too many other things that you have to do as part of your study program, so that there's sometimes little time left for this course or to go deeper into some of the extra stuff. Yeah, that especially is probably true for those who choose to do this course voluntarily and are not forced to do it. Yeah, but that helps. For those of you who said you prefer live over MOOC, will also be very interesting for us why the MOOC wasn't the best choice for you, or why you prefer live over MOOC. Is it just the fact that you have to do it yourself, that you have to motivate yourself, that you have to structure yourself, or do you just enjoy my voice in a live audience more, or would you like to be more in the live lecture and ask questions directly? What exactly is it? Is it something we could fix within a MOOC, or with some additional material or different interaction methods? Or is it really just that you hate watching recorded videos? What is it? So same as for the questions, for the feedback above. Feel free to leave us some feedback either right now, by email and anything else, or after the examination, because we would be really interested to learn more about that. And then we also have some suggestions, improvement suggestions. So the lecture is in English. It would be nice to have German slides. That is something we could consider, but we cannot promise for the future. But I get why, because some of you are first semester, you just graduated high school, you might not be as used to speak English than some master students. So I get the motivation. We have to check, and we will consider if we have the manpower to do so, because I think we're like several hundred slides into the lecture material now, and it would be quite some effort to maintain them in sync, and first of all create the German slides, but synchronize them and maintain them. But I'm not saying no, it's actually a suggestion that I did not even think about. Klare Definition der Zielgruppen, so clarify who is the target audience and what kind of knowledge is required. Already addressed that topic. More demanding homeworks. That's something that we also have on our to-do list. We know that those homeworks are, first of all, different, like to collect your trash or wash your dishes, but that they are also not among the hardest. And obviously the fact that you can just hand in empty sheets of paper also doesn't make it very demanding. So we are definitely reevaluating the exercise concept every semester and trying to improve it and make it different. So this is definitely on our list. And more interactions, yes, definitely. We are also very much interested in providing that, either with some additional seminar kind of style exercises, or even making the lectures itself more interactive. We also have some more ideas to make the MOOC more interactive, but we're working on that. But we absolutely agree with those suggestions and partially working on them. So this is all the feedback that we have from the course evaluation. Thank you very much for taking the time to participate in the survey, to providing us some feedback. And if you have more, leave us some feedback using some kind of side channel. Very much appreciated. We're not ignoring those feedbacks. We're really taking this into account and into our heart to make this course better. So thank you very much. Now, let's move on to the next part, the second part of today's lecture, recap. So today, there should, at least in this part, not be any knowledge that is new to you. This is really just a recap. So to essentially reiterate what we said and what the story and the point of this lecture was. So, if there would be someone in the live audience, I would now ask you about the definition of sustainability, because you should know it by heart now. And this is definitely going to be something that I want to hear from each and everyone in the lecture. What is the definition of sustainability? It doesn't have to be my definition that we choose here, but I want a definition of sustainability. And since I can only ask Anand right now, I'm just going to move forward. Or would someone like to put it in the chat, then we can, or unmute themselves, then we can also wait a few seconds. So, definition of sustainability, 5 seconds to go. Someone typing? Come on, come on, come on. You should all know them by heart by now. That's the problem with a lack of a live audience. So let's move on. Developments that meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So essentially, have an okayish life now without compromising the okayish life of future generations. We're also reiterated again and again on this most sustainable thing you can do is consume less, not just consume more or something else. And now let's have a look back, like where did we start initially? Because in the first introduction lectures, we essentially spent quite a lot of time to motivate the 3 key challenges that we identified for the 21st century. Climate change, environmental pollution, and resource scarcity. So there are definitely other challenges for this century, but I would argue that if we do not fix those, the others are not really important, because then society will not be existing in such a way that a job crisis or jobs being taken over by AI matter. And the climate change problem was very nicely illustrated by this figure in the background that shows you the global greenhouse gas emission pathways, how much CO2 equivalents can we emit into the atmosphere to reach the 1.5 degree goal that we once had, but which is now dead, how much can we emit for 2 degrees, and so on and so on. The most important takeaway here was that we were or are aiming for 1.5, or we claim to aim for 1.5 degree global warming, but even what is in the Paris Agreement, which was celebrated as one of the greatest achievements in climate change history, is essentially just aiming for 2.5 or 2.8. So at least what they promised there, or what they pledged there, despite the fact that they want to reach 1.5 in that agreement, so there is like a discrepancy, is just going for 2.5 or 2.8. And the actions that we're taking right now are even worse, because they only get us to 2.8 or 3.2, which is still better than no climate actions at all, which would go close to 5 degree global warming, but still you get the message. We discussed that very lengthily, that we need to do more. In this context, we also discussed like some basic definitions. What's the difference between weather and climate? What is climate change? So that you all have like the definitions to have a proper discussion about those topics. We also discussed whether we can like figure out some kind of an upper threshold for climate change, because we already know, okay, 1.5 degree is gone. So what's next? 1.6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Once you have hit one important threshold, there's like this tendency to just cross another line, another line, another line. So how long can we do that? And we also discussed that there is not really any like conclusive answer to that yet. There are some opinions and some statements, for example, by Professor Michael Mann from Penn State, that 2.7 would be quite uncomfortable, and that above 3 degree global warming we're probably in some kind of doomsday trouble. We also talked about the second challenge in quite some detail, environmental pollution, and that it's mostly a waste management problem, and that we as humans really suck at managing our waste. This illustration here just being one of the very well illustrated examples where we just threw nuclear waste into the ocean and said, if we cannot see it, it's not a problem anymore. But like you already know that story. We also talked about the problem of dwindling non-renewable resources or resource scarcity in general. There are already resources that are scarce by nature, like rare metals, but that further resources become more scarce, and that those are potentially leading to more conflicts than we are used to. I mean, there have always been wars over resources, be it colonization in Africa, which was a part of the World War I and II parts. The war in Ukraine is obviously there are political dimensions, but it's also a war about resources. Various wars in the Middle East about control of resources, so on. So wars are often about resources, but the more scarce certain resources, especially vital resources, become, the more conflicts you will have. This could be resources that you traditionally don't really think about as war resources, but we talked about arable land that becomes more scarce due to climate change, because we have desertification, we are polluting our land, there's too little or too much rain in various places, rain being, or water in itself being another very good example of a scarce resource. There is right now enough like drinking water on this planet. The problem is the distribution, and that is also true for rainfalls in the future. Like either there's too much or too little, and if you are not able to retain something when it was too much, then you have too little, and when people run out of water, they get quite grumpy. So those being a problem for us as well. So not just the high-tech rare metal stuff, but it can also become like a problem for very basic human needs in terms of water, arable land, and many other resources. And thereby, we concluded the motivation of this course with those three key challenges: climate change, or the adaptation to climate change, obviously also, environmental pollution, and the resource scarcity problem. And from there on, we looked into something, like I'm not like mentioning each and every slide now, but the rough lecture of this strategy. We looked into some ways of simulating what to do and where we're probably going to run into problems first. Because if you look at these challenges, you might ask, okay, what should I do? What can I do? And in order to find the best strategy, you might want to figure out, okay, if I do that, how is it going to impact the ecosystem? So the modeling might actually help us to make good decisions. So we looked into the really early foundations of modeling with respect to this before Anand then showed you the LCA approach. So the World 3 model, being super old, from the book The Limits to Growth from 1972, already gave us this World 3 model, and we looked in particular into the different scenarios that the World 3 model gives you, like the standard one, or also known as business as usual, which essentially provided us a collapse scenario that would decimate the human population radically. And then the question arises, okay, what to do in order to avoid that? How can we keep a nice life on this planet without getting into much trouble? We tried to change different assumptions, like unlimited resources or doubling resources, or assuming technological advances beyond everything that we have seen so far, focus on environmental pollution and so on and so on. And there were certain improvements, other things got worse, and in the end, we ended up with a so-called stabilized world scenario that looked quite nice, where we had a population stabilization in the 21st century, and also like human welfare on a high level. So something that sounds quite nice. We had some minor dents in industrial output and in food production. Pollution also went up quite high at some point, but we were still able to manage it. Unfortunately, that's not the scenario that we're working on right now. We're more looking towards a disaster scenario right now, but at least we have an idea where to go. The problem with the World 3 model is, first of all, it's super old. It's on one hand too complicated, but also too oversimplified, as we've talked about in the critics, but it doesn't give you a very good and precise answer whether you now should drive a combustion engine car versus a battery electric car, because this is just something that this model cannot do because it's working on larger scale. So that's why we next, I think I do not have a slide on that. No, unfortunately not. That's why we also looked, or more precisely Anand looked into the topic of life cycle assessments with you. How can I answer those questions? Like, should I use the internal combustion engine car or a battery electric vehicle? How do you calculate those things? How do you make a precise estimation or quantification of the sustainability or unsustainability of certain actions, to compare them and to outline the impact on the environment? Unfortunately, we could only give you like a rough crash course on this, but there are courses here at the university where you can also go deeper into those topics. Professor Christine Minke is, for example, an expert on life cycle assessments. If you're interested in those in more detail, have a look at her website or check out her courses. She is the real expert on this topic. We are just the amateurs trying to get you started and hooked on this topic. Afterwards, we went into the more conceptual area again. So what are concepts that could help us? And we first analyzed, okay, what is our current economic model that we're following, which is called the linear industrial economy. So super summarized in these like 3 words that we had: take, make, dispose. Where we first extract resources from the environment, then we make some products out of those, use these products, and then dump them. So take, make, dispose. Doesn't sound super sustainable, so what could be a better alternative? There's a figure. The overarching theme of TU Clausthal is the circular economy, because we think that this is actually a valid alternative approach to the linear economy, to the linear industrial economy. And we talked about the different cycles in this system. So before you produce a thing, an object, or a product, you already think about, okay, how can I redesign and remanufacture and build something in such a way that it supports the following 3 cycles, so that I can maximize the use of a product that I already created. So nothing that we have experienced like with various companies like Microsoft, Apple, TV manufacturers, that there are like already ends to a product after, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. So just when the guarantee runs out, you have to buy a new product because there are some components in there that are very hard to repair or not supposed to be repaired, so that you just buy another product. So maximize the use, utilize those resources as much as possible, and if something breaks, can I use the same thing that I just bought in a different context, or can I easily repair it? And in order to do that properly, you already have to start at the design and manufacturing part of this cycle, because if you design and manufacture a product that's very difficult to repair, you never ever get to this repair cycle. But even if repair and reuse at some point is not possible anymore, then we can go in the direction of refurbishing or remanufacturing. So how can I refurbish something very simple? And even only if that is not possible anymore, then we go to recycle and recover. But even for this last resort, so for the second worst option of recycling and recover, you still have to already think about those steps in the design and manufacturing process, because how do you make sure that you can extract as many resources as possible, in best case all of them, from a certain product when it has to be recycled? So what design steps have to be taken to do that, or which manufacturing steps do we have to consider to extract as much as possible with as little effort as possible? Because we also talked about the up and downsides of recycling. Advantages, like very straightforward, we get our stuff back, or at least parts of our resources back. But on the other hand, it's often a very cruel, tedious process. It takes a lot of manual work or a lot of energy. There are a lot of losses in there. So we talked about this like lengthily. That doesn't mean that we should not recycle, but it's always better to not to have to recycle in the first place. That was essentially the message that we had. We also looked into some special flavors of the circular economy, for example, the performance economy, where we refrain from owning things and instead just essentially try to purchase results of certain actions. So we talked about the famous drilling machine example. I do not want to own a drilling machine. I just do so because I need some holes in my walls. So why cannot I just buy a hole? And you could exaggerate this example up to like not owning molecules of certain resources, but instead of just renting molecules, they always remain with some kind, like some entity owning those things, and then essentially you have a pay-per-use principle or some other like means of actionable services. So like a very radical concept, but to give you an idea like where the story could go. And then obviously in like all of, like somewhere in between these different fields, we also have some things that already happen and that are very closely related to the performance economy, but also of course to the general circular economy concept. Because something like the sharing economy already goes in this direction, but is obviously not as radical. It's definitely part of the circular economy because we have the use and share part of the cycle just at the right bottom. But just because I share my drilling machine, we're not quite there yet where the producers of the drilling machine continue to own the drilling machine and thereby have a completely different incentive structure. But it's somewhere in between or like related to those concepts. But we also discussed that the circular economy is not perfect yet. There are still, or it might actually remain imperfect, but it's still better than what we have right now, like the linear economy. But there are some downsides to the circular economy. We talked about this concept of value of a product versus the damage that a production or a product causes. But we also discussed this assumption that we need this eternal economic growth and that without growth our society isn't worth it and that we'll all suffer and die a horrible death just because we do not consume enough. Because we have a limited system, we have finite resources on a finite planet, therefore unlimited growth won't be possible. Therefore also the name of the book from 1972, but also the title of this course, The Limits to Growth. And that the circular economy essentially only tries to cover up this limitation by decoupling or attempting to decouple economic growth and the consumption of natural resources. Because if I perfectly redesign everything, if I perfectly recover everything, if there is no loss of any kind in the economic cycle, then I could maybe try to have a certain level of growth. But even then, at some point, I'm running out of resources to keep in a cycle. So I cannot grow indefinitely. And this is something that the circular economy doesn't really account for. So it is a step forward, but it's not the end goal. So what else could be done there? We looked into sufficiency strategies. We also expressed like some suggestions for lifestyle changes. And then we also looked into the concept of circular societies that question these prevailing existing concepts. So not going to go into too much detail for the circular societies here because it's just a wrap up. But in the end, we had this concept or this matrix where the authors of this nice figure tried to cluster some different approaches towards the circular economy and the circular societies. The optimist and holistic approach is being the reformist circular societies, or the skeptical holistics being the transformational circular societies. And on the other side, we had the tech-centric circular economy or the fortress circular economy. We discussed a little bit the pros and cons, and also you had to think about this in yourself and your homework, which one you first of all would prefer, and then also which one seems to be more likely, and then that gives you some idea, okay, what do we have to do to get there? Part of the circular society concept is often the idea of having enough, but not wanting indefinite growth or more. And therefore we talked about eco-efficiency, eco-consistency, but all of this just leading us to the main point that I wanted to make of eco-sufficiency, where we had different definitions from Princeton or once again from the IPCC, but essentially what do I need to be fine or okay with that? And then like once I have that, I don't need more, I don't want more, which is very much different from earning as much money as possible, owning the biggest house, having as many cars as possible, or a new iPhone every day. Like what is enough and how do I get there? And from there on, we also took some detours towards Graeber and the question of how much do I have to work if I just want to be fine but not more. We had this discussion there, but I'm not going to go too much into detail with that anymore today, because this was just like a small detour here. But this detour landed us at the discussion about something like a universal basic income that would allow us to say, okay, look, I'm only working right now because I don't have food in the fridge. That forces me to do a job that might be super unsustainable or even unnecessary. If we just divide all the work that has to be done on this planet in terms of eco-sufficiency, divided by 8 billion people or 9 billion people, that means everyone, I don't know, works 1 day, 2 days, 3 days a week, half whatever, or not at all. And we still have all a fine life. Like how would we be able to do that and still make sure that no one starves to death? The universal basic income being one of those approaches to do that. It is a very complicated concept, not in terms of defining it, but how to implement it, because so far it has never been implemented by a country on this planet. There are some test runs, but it's quite difficult. There are a lot of questions about funding it, how exactly this universal basic income is supposed to be structured. So it is something that exists, but not something that we already have or that we could just roll out. And this is essentially a part of this, like of the whole story of this course, because a lot of those things that we introduced to you are not there yet. They are not ready for deployment, as you might say, as computer scientists. We talked about a circular economy. We have some aspects that are already there that we're doing, like the sharing economy, but we're not like near a perfect circular economy. We also do not have a performance economy. We do not have circular societies yet. There are various technologies that we discussed in the context of sustainability. We discussed them because they're not there yet, so because it teaches something new. We discussed the concept of eco-sufficiency because we're not doing that yet. We discussed universal basic incomes, far from being reality. And I also don't want to say that those are the only solutions. Part of this course was to put you in front of concepts that you might have never heard about and that you would never hear about as part of your study program, because those are not really discussed here. And we did not even mention to put all of those different things in this course, like the economy for the common goods, and there are so many other alternative concepts that exist beyond the linear and circular economy and this capitalistic mindset. So there are like a lot of alternatives out there, just no one teaches you, or it's like very hard to get exposure to those. But this was really part of this course, to open your horizon, to give you some new insights, and also give you some ideas on how to connect maybe Technical University of Clausthal, so there might be some of you who do have a very technical background, how to connect these technical things that you do with a sustainability background, beyond just having like the definition of sustainability or climate change and so on and so on. So this being a very short recap of the storyline of the course, what remains now is the question, now what? You have survived this course, you're gonna get grades in the exam, because I trust all of you that you will prepare nicely and therefore won't have any problems getting a 1.0 or a 1.3. So you all pass, but this question remains, what now? Because now you're fluent in the definitions revolving around sustainability. You have a very critical mindset now when it comes to greenwashing. You understand that there are alternative solutions out there, but you're still in this hamster wheel of, I need a job, I'm expected to earn a lot of money. If I want to work in that job, I have to do unsustainable things. I have to go on an airplane every other day. So like, what's the point of this course beyond just giving me some background knowledge? It was also meant for you to critically question certain lifestyle choices, certain decisions being made, and then obviously being able to propose alternative suggestions, but it's also supposed to make you question your own life changes, life choices. And motivating you, incentivizing you, or somehow triggering you to do something, because it's not something, as we discussed many, many times before, that can only be achieved by politicians. There are, like we had this discussion about activism, of not being happy with the political inactions that we have seen so far. And just pushing this to, yeah, someone else has to do this, is a little bit of a nice coping mechanism, but actually, like it starts with you. I'm not saying that all the companies and all the other stuff, it's not their fault, but companies are made out of people. Companies do not exist as a thing in itself that just magically acts. They are like made out of people, and if those people are unhappy or not willing to participate in the system anymore, then you're close to this this phrase or this saying like, imagine there's war and no one participates. So it's time for you to act. And that leads us back to the very first lecture where we briefly discussed this quote from Kate Marvell from the Gotthard Institute, who essentially said, yep, it looks quite shitty right now, but it's not really a reason to put your head in the sand or just jump out of a cliff, because courage is a resolve to do well without the assurance of a happy ending. So even if it looks really shitty, or if you don't believe in change, it still makes sense to do something. So what could you do? So we ask you, what of those 4 categories you think to be more desirable or more realistic? That gives you a framework. And from that framework, there are different ways to act. And what I'm proposing now is by no means like a complete list. You could do something completely else. You could become a digital entrepreneur, or like creating the first non-greenwashed eco startup and then save the planet. You can become a honest politician and finally do something. There are so many different ways. Like, this is not a course that teaches you what to do, it teaches you how to do and like what's the background necessary to do something. So all the stuff that is now following are just like some inspiration, some thoughts. So we talked about the fact that we are super horrible at minimizing waste, that we're super inefficient. And we also gave you this example, collect your trash, try to minimize your trash. I showed you, or I linked you the video of those people living 2 or 3 years not having filled a glass of dirt or of a jar of dirt or trash yet, as a like extreme example of something that you can do right away. But we also talked about, there is the rest of the picture, some other concepts that are, for example, focusing on minimizing or avoiding waste of a particular type, like food sharing. You can go to that website today, register, become a food sharer, thereby contributing to avoiding food waste. Done, great thing. So do something is the message. You don't have to become a food sharer, but do something. So taking responsibility, trying to figure out what you can do in your life or how you can avoid trash or waste. That could be some extreme zero waste examples, but what something you can definitely do is trying to reduce as much as possible. That could be something like eat local approach or buy local approach, not ordering stuff from China all the time. That can be like reducing the amount of lights that you use, the amount of heating you use, the amount of water you use, reducing your carbon footprint in terms of unnecessary flights. There are so many different ways. You're aware of most of them. It's just a matter of acting and doing them. So that's like the very straightforward thing that every 2-minute TED talk on sustainability gives you, right? But it's like, well, if we would do that already, I could save that time here. Just one example from like change, like from lifestyle changes. Various years back, I was a very vivid skydiver, And I have to admit, skydiving is one of the best experiences you can ever have. But it's also one of the most unsustainable hobbies that you could think of. I mean, besides maybe blowing up airplanes. Because you go on an airplane, you fly up to 4,000 or 6,000 meters, you jump out just to get back in the same airplane 20 minutes later and do that same thing all over again. There's rarely a hobby that could be more unsustainable than skydiving. So it's one of the coolest hobbies I ever did. Still, not doing that anymore, and looking for other alternatives. Of course, you could go base jumping, but there the death probability is something like, I don't know, 5 to 10%. My wife wouldn't be very happy with that. So, other hobbies, but no one has to do that. In general, for each of your hobbies or your lifestyle changes, the most sustainable thing is always to consume less. We iterated on that again and again. Other ways to act right away, to not super complicated. Something is broken, repair it. You cannot repair it yourself, there are repair cafes. You need something, try sharing first or go to a second-hand shop. Like most of the stuff we buy nowadays is second-hand. Why not embracing that? And especially for students, a hoodie in a second-hand shop is like $5 or $6. It's not even close to what the cheapest hoodies at Kick get you. So I guess like $5 or $6 is probably quite a nice price for a very well designed hoodie, also with respect to quality. So there are like different options of things you can do right away that do not really stress your time budget too much. Of course, being more sustainable is always, at least now, more time intensive, I would say, also from my own experience, because going to a repair cafe or trying to find someone who repairs your broken phone takes you more time and sometimes even more expensive than just ordering the same phone again on Amazon. That's definitely easier. The same is maybe true for a second-hand clothes shop, because you don't know what's there. If you go to New Yorker's, Kick, or any other fast fashion model or shop based on dead people, like you know what you get. You might not get the color you want, but essentially you know that you get a hoodie if you want one. So there are options available there. Food production being obviously something, as you already noticed throughout this course, that our research group is very passionate about. This might be more difficult for you to act on this. I mean, food sharing goes a little bit in the direction of being more resilient with respect to food production and utilizing the food that has been produced more efficiently. But otherwise, this might be more complicated to implement if you do not, by chance, have a property where you can grow food or implement some kind of food systems. But concepts like agroforestry, permaculture, silvopasture, and so on, or syntropic agriculture, like there are so many different things that can be implemented in a different context. But for all of those, as Gabriel already told you in his talk, you don't also need to own your own land. You can also become part of an eco project that implements those kinds of concepts. So you don't have to go to the cat farm in France. You can also go to some projects that are doing this in the near vicinity of Braunschweig and Goslar. So there's Siebenlinden near Wolfsburg, but there are also other more eco-community and eco-projects that are implementing parts of those. Of course, they're not only built around agroforestry, they have also other goals, but those being concepts, projects where this is already practiced, where you can become a part of this. Just saying I don't have a large property does not really give you an excuse to not participate in those practices. Could also be, what is very popular in Germany, a Kleingarten. Get a Kleingarten, super cheap, even affordable for students. Could be a group project, could be something else, just as an inspiration. I'm not saying you do that, I'm just giving you ways of acting right now. All of those not being long-term things, but things that you can do relatively easy. There are also various groups that focus on urban or balcony gardening communities in Braunschweig and Goslar. Not sure about Clausthal, but you get the idea. If those do not really interest you and you're more on the political spectrum, become a politician, do something. We talked about the lack of progress with respect to political action, do something. If you do not want to become a politician, but rather an activist, there's also a lot of room and a lot of interest and a lot of need for people to do something. This is up to you. There is a lot of space for action. So we talked about some of the very popular movements like Fridays for Futures, Extinction Rebellion. We talked about Last Generation. I think there was also like a discussion about whether some of those radical strategies actually make sense and move us forward or not. I'm not saying any of this, like which side to choose. This is your decision. And yeah, then we also at the end briefly touched like alternatives of different economic systems and lifestyle. And obviously it's quite difficult to just say, okay, look, I'm not going to participate in this anymore. But there are like test projects, smaller communities who already try to practice eco-sufficiency or alternative economy models. The Cat Farm being one, Sieben Linden being another. There are various cooperatives or non-profit companies. There are cooperative communities where they can join or for which you can work. So there are like different projects also in the near vicinity here that could be part of your future concept, where you could help and support a better future. One of the fun facts, when I Googled sustainable business cooperatives, because I was looking for some definitions and some further information because I wanted to find a link that I did not find in the end. But the first Google search result, the ad that is displayed here before the first search result for sustainable business cooperatives was actually this image here, a link from it was supposed to lead me to Saudi Aramco, and where Saudi Aramco is fabulating something about sustainable business. And for those of you who do not know what Saudi Aramco is, it's a Saudi Arabian oil company, the biggest, largest oil company on the planet, and on the second place on this list that we discussed previously when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. So Saudi Aramco single-handedly is responsible for 4.5% of all greenhouse gas emissions in just a 20-year decade. Now it's probably even more. So that already gives you a hint of what this website was about. And it was definitely not about sustainable business practices. So back to that. So I was talking about alternative living concepts or communities or projects to join. Something that I find particularly interesting for that, which is unfortunately not existing in Germany yet, but maybe some of you becomes a politician and pushes that, or maybe some of you finds a way to create such a project here in Germany, is the One Planet development concept that is essentially something that exists in Wales, in the country of Wales. And they have the goal of changing within 1 generation the society concept in such a way that Wales only uses its fair share of its Earth's resources. So you know how big Wales is, you know how many resources Wales consumes roughly to maintain its lifestyle, and then you could say, is it a fair share or not? And as most first world countries do, they use way more than they should. And essentially the question is, how do we now get to a more fair distribution, and also how do you reduce the emissions to 0 at best case? And what they're doing is they fund lifestyles, low impact development principles, and enabling test communities. So there are some really cool short documentaries, research reports, experience reports from people who, as part of this One Planet development program, were allowed to prototype and test communities that in places where you were usually not allowed, for example, to build. So something like more or less protected natural habitats. And there they got the permission to, for example, construct single homes or operate cooperative communities, but all under the restriction or the constraint that they are not supposed to extract more from this site, from this property, from this area, than is regrown. So essentially the planetary boundary concept nailed down to a specific location, which they are monitoring very strictly. So there's like one nice documentary that I have in mind where a family actually has to report how many strawberries and raspberries they harvested, like up to like the amount of raspberries in grams or like in terms of numbers. The same goes for what other types of resources they extracted, but also provided back to the area or the space, and essentially thereby figuring out ways of alternative living concepts. Those all being very experimental and maybe not large scale, but you have to start somewhere. That's essentially the point. So there are ways to live more sustainable, to act more sustainable. A lot of the things that I just gave you are like more short or midterm. Long-term requires maybe some different approaches. But as I said, I'm not here to tell you exactly what to do. We're here to give you ideas, expose you to concepts of better solutions, but it's up to you to also do something about it. And as we express in the motivation, you are the generation that should be most concerned about those things, because otherwise it might be a very bleak future that you're looking forward to. So, last slide, wrap up. Do something. There is no planet B. You have to do something. And even if it's just a small progress, do something. And even if it looks or seems to be very, very unlikely that this ends well, still do something. It's not like you have anything better to do. So do something, lead by example. And that's the course. We very much appreciate that you took the time and joined the course. We would be very happy to also see you in future, either lectures, seminar, but also in non-university, non-academic contexts, because it's not the only thing we do. So thank you very much. I hope to see you soon. We wish you all the best for the exam. We're gonna cut the recording now and meet again in 10 minutes, where we're gonna do the usual Q&A session. And that's it. For everyone not joining the Q&A, thank you very much and see you soon.